You take something like 20,000 breaths every single day. And with each one of those, you're pulling the outside world deep into your body. But have you ever stopped to think about what's really in that air? Well, today, we're going on a bit of an anatomical journey. We're going to follow the air from the sky, straight into the lungs, and even into the bloodstream, using one specific county in Alabama as our real-world example. So our story kicks off in Jefferson County, Alabama. For more than a century, this place has had an identity forged in steel and iron. You're looking at the historic Sloss furnaces here. Places like this, they literally built the local economy, but they also shaped the environment in ways we're still grappling with today. And that industrial legacy? Well, it has a very, very modern consequence. Right now, Jefferson County is home to the single biggest greenhouse gas polluter in the entire United States. I'm not just talking about the biggest in Alabama, but in the whole country. And get this, it's not a new thing. As this quote from Inside Climate News points out, we're talking about a 9-year streak. For 9 years running, this one plant has held the top spot. It's a persistent reality for the people living there. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the polluter itself. Then, we'll dig into what's actually in the air. From there, we'll follow it right into our lungs, link it to some real health data, check out another threat called coal ash, and then wrap up by looking at why the scientific picture isn't always so black and white. So let's start at the source, right? It's time to get to know the facility that's at the very heart of this story. So meet Plants Miller. It's this enormous coal-fired power plant. It's a huge operation, a major player in powering the state, and it's been running in some form since the late 1970s. So what does it actually mean to be the number one polluter? Well, it means this number, 16.6 million. That's how many tons of greenhouse gases Plant Miller pumped into the atmosphere in 2023 alone. It's a number that's almost hard to wrap your head around. Okay, so what is actually in all those emissions? I mean, beyond just greenhouse gases, what are the specific pollutants we should be concerned about for our health? Burning coal releases this complex cocktail of pollutants. You've got things you've probably heard of, like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. Those are the things that can create smog. But you also have mercury and this is the really important one for our anatomy lesson, something called particulate matter. So let's zoom in on particulate matter, or PM for short. It's not just one thing. As you can see here, it's a mix of all sorts of tiny solid particles and liquid droplets that are just floating in the air. We're talking about microscopic bits of soot, metals, dust, you name it. And this right here is why it's such a big deal. The most dangerous kind of these particles, called PM 2.5, are unbelievably small. Just picture a single strand of your hair. These particles are more than 30 times smaller than that. And honestly, their tiny size is what makes them such a huge threat to our health. All right, so now we get to the core of our anatomy lesson. What actually happens when you breathe in particles that are 30 times smaller than a human hair? Let's trace their exact path, from the air all the way into our cells. Okay, so first, you breathe them in. Simple enough. But here's where it gets wild. Your nose and throat have all these natural filters, right? Tiny hairs, mucus, all designed to trap bigger stuff. Well, PM 2.5 is so small, it just slips right past all those defenses. It travels all the way down into the deepest parts of your lungs, to the alveoli. Those are the tiny, delicate air sacs where the real magic happens, where oxygen gets into your blood. And because these particles are so microscopic, they don't stop there. They can actually cross right through that barrier and get into your bloodstream. And from there, they can travel anywhere your blood goes. So, once these pollutants are just cruising around inside our bodies, what do they actually do? This is where we can connect that anatomical journey to some real-world health data coming out of Alabama. Take a look at this chart. It's showing adult asthma rates. For a while, Alabama's rate was actually lower than the U.S. average. But as you can see, it started to climb, eventually creeping up past the national rate. Now, if we zoom in from the whole state to just the area right around Plant Miller, the data gets even more striking. According to an analysis of EPA data, folks living within just 1 mile of the plant are in the 90th to 95th percentile nationally for respiratory health risks. That is an incredibly high-risk group. And this lines up with what science tells us. The research has clearly shown what these pollutants do. They can cause direct irritation, which leads to things like coughing and wheezing. They can make it harder to breathe, reduce your overall lung function, and, this is huge, they can really aggravate pre-existing conditions like asthma, making them much, much worse.
But the threat isn't only what's coming out of the smokestack. There's another huge source of pollution we need to discuss, and this one is happening right on the ground.
So think about it. When you burn millions of tons of coal, you're left with a whole lot of waste. It's called coal ash. And all that ash has to go somewhere, which is usually these massive landfills or ponds located right there at the power plant.
And this stuff isn't harmless. It's basically a concentrated mix of the toxic things that were in the coal to begin with. We're talking about really potent neurotoxins like lead, mercury, and arsenic. These are substances known to damage nerve cells, which can affect things like learning, memory, and brain development.
And here's the problem. That ash doesn't always stay put. It can dry out and turn into something called fugitive dust. Then all it takes is a windy day to pick up those toxic particles and carry them from the storage sites right into the nearby communities. It's a whole other way for people to be exposed.
Okay, for our final section, things get a little more complex. This is where we see how real-world data can sometimes tell two different stories, and it really requires us to put on our critical thinking caps. Now, this is absolutely fascinating, and it really highlights a big challenge in environmental health. On one side, we know that many of these pollutants are carcinogens. Science has proven they increase cancer risk, so you'd expect to see higher cancer rates in the area, right? But, and this is a huge but, when researchers actually looked at the data from the Alabama Cancer Registry, they found local cancer rates are not statistically higher than the rest of the state. A known risk doesn't always show up as a clear pattern in the population data, and a massive part of science is figuring out all the complex reasons why. And that all leaves us with a really fundamental question that goes way beyond Jefferson County. Look, we all depend on electricity every single day, but the process of making it can have a direct impact on our bodies. So the challenge for all of us is to figure out that balance. How do we power our modern lives while also protecting the very thing that lets us live them, our health?